Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Live and Unscripted. Once again, we're trying this out on what is for us a late Friday afternoon. Seems to be working well, but I love to hear back from those of you. Of course, not everybody 100% happy, but we're doing the best we can, and this is a time that works really well for us. So let us know where in the world you're watching from and what this time feels like for you. I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan, and today, as so often, I am working on a client quilt. I am doing freehand or free motion edge-to-edge quilting, so same quilting design over the whole quilt. That's what I'll be working on today. So we call this show Live and Unscripted because it does not get edited, so you get to see everything in real time, and occasionally, in fact fairly frequently, you get to see oopses as they happen too. Might be thread breaks, might be need to change presser feet, whatever the case may be. We don't edit out those bits, so you get to see the whole project in real time. Essentially, I'm just inviting you into my studio to kind of look over my shoulder as I work. So Mr. Producer's highlighting there the like and subscribe, and if you want to know when these events are coming up, either subscribe and then click the bell for notifications and or sign up for my newsletter, because I do try to send out an email a day or two before with a picture of what I'm going to be working on and some of the topics that I intend to make part of the show. So to get on my newsletter, all you have to do is head to my website, StitchedBySusan.com, and eventually, after 20 seconds or so, you'll get a little pop-up that invites you to do that and gives you something free in return. So, that said, let's see who all is tuning in, Mr. Producer, sir. There we go. Cheeky Quilters. Hey, friends. Hi, Amber. Too fun. Gladys in Ireland. Awesome. This must be well on into the night for you, I would think. Nita, hi everyone, finally received snow, 3 feet. Oh my goodness, but didn't have power all day till just a few minutes ago. Oh boy, that was nice. Knew I was coming. Judy, happy Valentine's Day. Yes, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. It's a lovely snowy day here as well. Atlanta, Georgia, we don't get very much snow. Well, we just got some this last week or two as well. That's our first significant snowfall of the year too. Coyote Cat, hello from Iowa. And Sue in Sheboygan Falls, getting ready for another snowstorm. Kate in snowy Ontario, Canada. And Wilma, cold and snowy in Richland, Washington. That's not too terribly far from me. Sandra, Fort Pierce, Florida, South Florida. And Sienna, glad I'm finally catching one live. I think I've watched just about every episode you've posted. I've had my long arm 6 months and have learned so much. Oh, that feels so good. I'm glad you're finding it helpful. Another Susan, good morning from Australia. Yes, it's probably in the wee hours for you. And Anne, happy Valentine's Day. Super. Yes, happy Valentine's Day to you all. And I knew I would be airing this on that day, and there's probably lots of people that aren't able to catch this live. They're doing something else today. That's fine. This will always be here for you to come back to. So today's project is in fact a client quilt. It belongs to a lady named Sandy, and we're going to start with the backing, and I'll show you the quilt as I go about putting it on. Just a couple of words before we dive into it. Number one is huge thank yous to my husband, who I call Mr. Producer. His name is Dave. This is not a one-woman show. We have 4 cameras going all the time, and he's the one that flips back and forth between them and all of that, and does all the sound checks and fixes the problems as we go along. So a big thank you there. And then also to our good friend Dan, whose guitar music you hear throughout the show. It's the one constant since I began this show, I don't know, 4 years ago, maybe 4 and a bit. We've always included his very lovely and soothing guitar music. So big thank yous there. Live and Unscripted, as I said earlier, is very much an unedited, real-time show. I try and air them about twice a month. Now, last year I did a ton of traveling, so it was a bit less frequent. Want to get back to that in 2025 if we possibly can. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts on that, but I'd like to try and do it twice a month. It just seems like touching bases is good, and it just gives you an opportunity to see a sampling of different projects at about that pace. So let's get started on this one. Let me grab the backing. I'm off camera for a second. Here's our backing. It's a very simple little calico. Now, something that I talk about when I'm loading quite a bit is the direction of seams. When Well, I won't say it that way. I was going to say when I have my druthers. But there's a couple things that I take into consideration. In general, it's easier to have a seam that's on the backing run from side to side, because then you don't get any awkward tension when it's going from one bar to the next. That can sometimes pull a little tighter. But another thing to consider is whether I not want the quilt to be lengthwise top to bottom or lengthwise side to side. Excuse me. And in this case, I'm choosing to have the seam go top to bottom so that I can make the quilt go side to side. I say so often, there's not one right way or a necessarily wrong way. There's just the things you think about and then the decision you come to. And in this case, I'm deciding to do my quilt from the length of it from side to side. In either event, I want to be sure that I have a nice straight edge on this front rail. And in fact, I do. It's trimmed up nice and neatly. It is not a selvage. There's actually no selvage on this backing. It's all being trimmed off. And by the way, if you're a quilt maker out there and not a long armor, you do not need to trim the selvages off. I do like them to be trimmed off in that seam, but if they're on the edges, they can stay on. That helps to keep things square and straight, actually. But in this case, they are trimmed off, and that's fine. It's a nice straight edge. I'll be very careful not to stretch it, but to put it on beautifully smoothly. Just grab a couple of red snappers so I don't have to keep making trips over to my jug that they stand in. Red snappers are certainly my favorite way of loading. They're so quick. I kind of get my fabric in place, hold it with my left hand, snap, snap, snap it with my right. And in very short order, we've got a quilt backing loaded. I may do less talking today. I've got just a little bit of a cold and a throat tickle going on, and as I talk, it tickles worse. So you might notice Susan not talking very much. Wouldn't that be a switch? Okay, next step is to toss this whole backing over the far rail. Let's move Stella a little further. Now this quilt did come to me nicely folded, and you may have seen me in other episodes or heard me talk about, I don't really ever press backings. My secret weapon is just a spray bottle of water, and I just lightly spritz that backing, and any of those creases just relax enough that I won't get any creases as I'm quilting. I won't get any pleats in the back. A couple of dark threads on here I'm just picking off. Our quilt is quite light in color, so we don't want any of those dark earth threads showing through. There we go. Perfect. And as I roll it up this time, I'm going to do it from the front so that I can manage this seam a little better. I'm just putting my hand on it to stretch it out just a tiny shade. I don't want it to pull up tighter than the fabric, so I'm just looking in every direction as it's rolling, making sure it's rolling on smooth, no parts are rolling on faster than other parts, and making especially sure that that seam does not pull too tight. Have to keep walking around to see how far it is. Just about there. Just a few more inches. Right there. Grab my snappers. Now when I look at my backing as a whole, not sure if this shows on camera, it looks a little loose in this fabric area and a little tight in this seam area. So here's a trick for evening that out. I'm going to roll most of the quilt back onto my other roller. And I'm keeping some tension, like just with my hand, I'm keeping some tension on this front roller so that it's pulling just a little bit. And I'm going to roll it all one way and then roll it all back to the beginning, and that will just even out that tension through the whole thing. I'm almost at the end of my quilt, so now I'll flip my ratchets and roll the other way. It just takes a minute, but it's kind of magical how it smooths out any little bit of unevenness there might be, any saggy parts. It just distributes it evenly. Better. I am happy with that. All right, grabbing the batting, which the cat thinks he'd really like to have. This is 80-20 batting, so 80% cotton, 20% polyester. Looks like I cut it a little bit long. I may need to trim it a smidge. Let's actually just do that right now. So here's what I mean. My batting at this end is some inches longer than my backing. I don't like that to be the case because it gets caught up in the apparatus of my machine as I move it around, and sometimes even in the rollers. So I'm just going to grab a pair of scissors and quickly trim some of that off. It doesn't matter if it's longer than the quilt. I just don't care for it to be longer than the backing. Still a little bit longer. There we go. We'll give this piece to the kitty. How's that? There, your own special piece. He's happy. Okay. I was just today actually working on a new online course that I'm releasing soon. And in it, it's very much beginner level, so I'm talking about the types of batting that I use most commonly and talking about whether or not batting has a wrong side or a right side. And I'm not going to come down hard on one opinion or the other, but I've been fortunate with the 80-20 that I've used. I've used Hobbs a lot, and this is by Winline, the particular brand that I have on here. It doesn't seem to be too sensitive. I've used it both ways with good success. So I just use whatever way it turns out, that's the way I put it on, and it seems to be just fine. I think you could spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's up and what's down, but I don't. So here's our pretty quilt. It's all in these 30s feed sack type reproduction fabrics. So pretty. And I mentioned in my description that one of the things that I'm paying attention to as I'm quilting is, I think I worded it, the less than flatness. And it's not severe, but when I lay this out flat on the floor, it is visible. And that is, this piano key border is ever so slightly smaller than the center. Can you see this? Just a little here. There's not any ripples or pleats or anything like that, but just a little bit of fullness in the central area. Knowing that as I go into the quilting process will help me zhuzh, to use my favorite word, a little of that fullness in. I don't want it to sag in the middle. I don't want to keep pulling it down and having, you know, a smile on the bottom of the quilt when I get to the end, right? So every time I advance, I'm going to make sure I'm getting that little bit of fullness, even if it's only a 1/4 inch. If I get it in with every advance, the quilt will be square and straight when it's all said and done. And that's what we're after. Sandy did a great job of doing what I call a victory lap. She just did it actually on 2 sides of the quilt, but that just means running a line of stitching all the way along, and that keeps these little seams from pulling open. That is really, really helpful when you're making a quilt. Alrighty, let's get to basting. So I am stitching on a Bernina Q24. I am using Isacord 40 weight thread in an eggshell color. 0101 is the color number, if you care to know that. And at the moment, I'm just going to lay down a 1/4 inch basting line, about equal with where Sandy's little victory lap is. These seams are still wanting to stretch a little bit, so you're seeing me grab kind of where it's already stitched and just tugging it under the needle a little bit quicker than it would do if I was not hanging on to it. That little bit of help and nudge can make a world of difference. And if you're not comfortable winging it as I'm doing, you can always take the time to drop a few pins in to make sure that you've got everything laying flat and square before you start stitching, and that it doesn't shift as you stitch. While I'm here, I'm going ahead and putting my side clamp on. Yesterday I was working on minis right in the center of my frame, so I had my elastics pulled really, really long. I just like to go slow enough that I have enough time to make any adjustments I need to. If any of these little seams were coming open, I can tuck it back in place. They aren't, but going slowly just helps me have time to correct those things as I go and not have to go back and undo and redo things. Just like that. I said it a little too soon. Spoke too early. And all that happened was that seam was a tiny bit open and my hopper foot slid right under it. We'll just start stitching again. I was getting too close to the edge. Start stitching again a little bit further away. Where's my bobbin thread? There we go. Anchor that basting stitch right there. And we'll just start again. That seam that's coming open just a little, I'm just going to go back over it a little bit with my basting, kind of reinforce it. We're getting a good chance to see all these sweet little prints. Today I've got what Bernina calls a darning foot on my machine. It's probably the most commonly used foot for free motion quilting, although I personally often have my ruler foot on. But today I did change out to the little darning foot. Gives good visibility. Okay, now we'll clamp this side. Magnets on the front side, and all will be secure. I'm curious, are any of you at home sewing this evening, or do you have something fun going on for Valentine's Day, or did you do that already? And now you're back in your sewing room. So I can see I've got the front of my quilt floating, in other words, hanging down the front here. And I can see that it is, there's not exactly fold lines, but kind of wrinkles sagging in the middle. That's showing me again, this center is indeed a little bit bigger than the edges. So I am going to take care to pull up just a little of that. I'm going to stitch a fairly curvy design, so I'm going to be able to work that little bit in as I'm quilting. And if I do a little bit of that with each pass, I will be much less likely to have an ugly surprise when I get to the bottom. And every time I do advance the quilt, I'll kind of assess that again. Am I keeping up with it? Do I need to do more? Do I need to do less? Whatever the case may be. Okay, our quilt is all secure. I'm going to tug this side up a little bit more. It seems to have the more severe droop in the middle. Smooth that out and distribute it. That will all quilt in beautifully. Okay, any questions before we start quilting, Mr. Producer? Let's see a few questions. Mary Ellen, Dave is now your quilt loading assistant too. Yes, he is. He knows a lot about quilting. Do you want to put me on the front camera, Dave? Sue, a while back I saw to not push against your bars when loading with red snappers because you could eventually bend your bar, but try to support it. Is this not a problem? I don't think so, Sue. On my bars, like, they're metal. I can't feature them bending, and especially because I don't do it when they're fixed. You know what I mean? They're always turning. I've not ever had any problem with that in the hundreds of quilts I've done. I foresee that it could be if maybe you had wooden rollers, perhaps, but I've never had it happen to me. Mr. Producer is theorizing that maybe lighter weight ones would. I'm not sure. I just know it hasn't ever happened to me. So, Sienna, how does Isacord compare to Glide? I've only ever used Glide, and I'm curious. They actually are quite similar, Sienna, especially if you have similar weights. I've not used a ton of Glide just because I've liked Isacord and have used it for a long time, but I know others that do, and I think they behave very similarly. They're both 100% trilobal polyester, so I think they behave very similarly. Nita, can I ask what Kitty's name is? He really wants to be part of the show. Yes, indeed he does. He's still sitting over here beside me, just keeping an eye on things. His name is Berlioz. If you watched Aristocats back in the day, then you know the name, but mostly we call him B or Mr. B. Adele, hi from Chile, Atlanta. Would you ever... Oh, okay, maybe enter the rest of the question. Adele, if you see that, you must have hit the send button before you were quite ready. Francis is finishing a baby quilt tonight. Awesome. And Wilma is finishing a Chatwick quilt I've been doing and sharing in Advance. Advance being my monthly membership group. Louise, I quilted 2 crib quilts on the long arm and used 2 patterns from the masterclass. Awesome. My client loved the patterns. So these would be quilting designs from my quilting masterclass. That's great, Louise. Nice to see that. Okay. Well, we're using another one tonight that I teach in my masterclass, and I'm going to cough again. Sorry. Excuse me. In chatting with this client, turns out that she does not love feathers, but she likes flowers. So I'm going to use hibiscus on this quilt, which is a very floral design. And FYI, I recently did a guest blog post for Amy Smart of Diary of a Quilter, and I was talking about prepping your quilt for a long armor. And one of the points I made was that when you're working for other people, even if they say, just quilt whatever you want, get them to tell you some sort of preferences, because most often people will either like very contemporary or very traditional or very soft and curvy and floral or not. So in this lady's case, she just offered me that information. She said, I don't love feathers, but I do like floral things. So that makes it really easy for me. And wouldn't it be terrible if I did quilt feathers all over it before I knew that she didn't care for them? So I'm glad she gave me that information. That was great. So my long arm's name is Stella. Stella is really rattling. I'm not sure if you can hear it on air, which we kind of joke in the Bernina world. Our girls tell us when they want to be oiled or when the bobbin is getting empty. So my bobbin must be fairly low because I did just oil Stella before we started. This tickly cough is going to be a nuisance, isn't it? Let's just get those long threads out of the way. I think we're going to try stitching in manual mode tonight. I haven't done that recently. It seems like my last couple shows I've been, for one reason or another, doing things I needed to go slower or pay attention to. So tonight we're going to go into manual mode and see how that behaves for us. I'm just trying to get a stitch speed set. So if you're not familiar with that, manual mode just means the machine is not regulating stitch length anymore. It's just going at a speed, a motor speed that I've assigned it. So many stitches per minute. And it's up to me to move smoothly and to control the stitch length with my movements. I enjoy quilting this way, especially when I'm doing a quilt that takes a couple of hours. This to me is a much more relaxing sound and even feel. It's just a little smoother. It's going to be tricky to see the quilting on these prints. So I give you full permission to be carrying on a conversation without me in the chat. There's going to be a lot of times when you won't be able to see the quilting very clearly. What I'm doing with my left hand here is just nudging a little bit of that fullness in areas where I can see it's kind of collecting or pooling. I'm just encouraging it to get under the needle a bit faster and take up that fullness. I'm just going to lower my top tension one wee notch. I can almost see the thread looks a little bit flat on the top. Just that tiny adjustment will probably make a difference. Here again, just nudging in that little bit more fabric. And it really is a cumulative process. If you do a little bit of it all the time with each pass, you can usually avoid any awkward pleats. Also, choosing a quilting design that is quite curvy like this one is helps too. Broke our thread. Not sure what happened there. Actually, it's not broken. Did the bobbin thread break? Interesting. Nothing seems to be broken, but it's reading broken. Let's just take it off manual mode for a moment. I am going to go ahead actually and break the thread because I've pulled a long enough tail. It won't pull back in there. Mr. Producer brought me some Ricolas. I'm going to tuck one in my mouth and I'll try desperately not to click it against my teeth continually, but it will at least keep my throat soothed. So quite honestly, not sure what happened there, but my machine thought it had broken a thread. And I've just overlapped my stitching by about generous 1/4 inch, 3, 4, 5 stitches. Done a few lock stitches, and then I'll just launch back into my quilting and set it again. So, is something not pulling through correctly? Yes, it is experiencing resistance. So, it's not in fact broken, but it's not flowing freely. So what I'm going to do now is rethread. Something has come out of place in the threading sequence. Let's just go ahead and undo that little 1.5 inches. Do you see? Kind of. So when I put the presser foot down, it feels even harder than it should with the presser foot down. Do you know what I mean? It should be stiff, but not quite that stiff. So I'm just going to snip the thread and rethread it. Something has come out of its groove, so to speak. That feels right. Let's put the presser foot down. That feels right. Okay, let's try again. Nope, I didn't get it on point. Let's try one more time. Not that it would show in this print, but we like to have an accurate overlap if we can. So again, 4 or 5 little lock stitches overlapping what was there before. Let's go gingerly, see what happens. Just gonna cut my thread tails. That seems to have done it. Okay, we're going back to our manual mode. You guys like the pink tip nails. I went out on a limb this week when I had my nails done. I'm usually all about the classic French tip, but this week I thought, be bold. I'm laughing at myself because it's not very bold, is it? Sometimes these busy and fine prints can be really, really difficult to see where you're quilting. And tonight, because I'm quilting for you, I'm just going to grin and bear it and sort of get my nose in close to it where I can see. But if you're doing this at home and find that you can't see where you're driving, an easy fix is to literally turn out all the lights in your room. If you have window blinds, even close them, but turn out the overhead lights, turn out the machine lights, all the things, and then shine one light on it from the side. So if you've got a small light that you can attach to your machine, or I have a floor lamp that I can put low and to shine against my work from the side, essentially what it does is create a shadow wherever the stitching is, and so you're quilting by shadow. And I have found that to be the best solution for extremely hard to see projects. Lots of people will recommend black lights, but there are fabrics for which even a black light will not help. But quilting by shadow works no matter what the color. This week, apropos of nothing really, I was reading in a Facebook group, someone was kind of comparing some different long arm machines and asking questions about them, and so I was chatting a little bit about my experience with my Bernina machine. And in the interest of answering her question, I opened up my kind of the technician's servicing areas in my menus to see how many stitches I've put on my machine, because I've had it almost exactly 2 years. It's about 2 years plus 1 week. So, before I tell you, I'm going to throw it out there in the chat. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to how many stitches Stella has? And I'll give you a tiny clue. I've done about 250 quilts over the last 2 years. Maybe 275. Close to that anyways. Sort of like guessing how many jelly beans are in the jar. How many lifetime stitches does Stella have? You can see that last hibiscus quite nicely on the white fabric, can't you? for half a second and grab a tissue. I won't honk into it, I promise. Finish this pass and then we'll talk about that volume of stitches, and then after I get set up for the next pass I'll maybe tell you a little bit about our cruise, which I guess it's 2 weeks tomorrow that we're home from it. Gosh, time flies, doesn't it, in a blur. But I bet some of you who were watching were on that. We had such a good time. And by the way, if you are enjoying this live and unscripted style, gosh, we've already had a thread break, haven't we? You know it's unedited. I would love, though, if you would give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make it more visible to more quilters. Always a good thing. And again, if you click the notification bell, YouTube will kindly let you know every time I'm going live. The thread break again. So interestingly, I was thinking about this since it happened the first time, and someone else was posting the other day a little reel, on Instagram, and she said something about, we don't always know why this happens, and that's the truth of it. We sometimes think of our machines as, magical, never have a thread break, never have an issue, but the truth of the matter is, I am currently quilting at 1,450 stitches a minute. That's a lot of stitches, even in 5 minutes. And it is still a mechanical machine, and I just had a thread break. And I see, you guys probably, can you see on the close-up camera? I doubt you can on this crazy print. But I'm about 2 or 3 stitches back. I had this, can you see that? It's kind of shredded. So that was the first problem, and I didn't see that when it happened, or I would have stopped. But I need to go back to that point, is what I'm saying, because I don't want that shredding to be in the quilt. Because obviously a fiber at least of my thread broke, and then it kept on stitching for some stitches until the whole thing snapped. And I don't always know what the reason is. Usually once or twice I just restart, and then if I can see what the problem maybe is, like the last time I thought it was the threading, then I might change that. And if it happens 2 or 3 times, then I start to look even deeper, like is it a problem with the bobbin or something like that. But it just does happen from time to time. Mr. Producer's laughing. You must all be commiserating with me. I know you are. Well, let's talk about how many stitches while I'm undoing, because this is boring work. Okay, apparently Mr. Producer's saying there's a bunch of guesses. He's going to put a whole bunch up, and I'm not supposed to tell the secret yet. I won't. Okay, I'm glancing up betwixt and between. Oh, okay. Well, let's just do that for fun. Let's do that for fun. I'll drop my blue seam ripper so I can see where I am on the quilt. Let's have some questions. Okay, questions first, Mr. Producer says. He's the boss. Adele, would you ever consider doing a victory lap on a customer quilt just to eliminate that loose seam problem? I absolutely would consider it. I've done enough quilts now that I can manage that as I go, and so I don't worry about it too much. I would do a few pins before I took the time to do a victory lap, but it absolutely is an option. If you felt more confident then in basting it in place and keeping it all square, absolutely a fine option. Just know it does take a few minutes, and maybe add that into your time. Carrie, I have trouble following the design and knowing where to go next when stitching with busy print fabrics. Any tips? I gave you my biggest one, which, like, shifting the lighting, changing the lighting is the first tip. But the strongest that I've ever found that I can do is that idea of turning out all the room lights, all the machine lights, and shining a strong light in from the side and creating shadows. Infallible. Okay, so interestingly, Mr. Producer, while we were talking and I was quilting, he was setting up a light off to my right, and we're going to give that a try on camera. It's funny how on camera it doesn't always translate the way that it does when I'm looking at it with my eyes, and so we'll just see how that translates. Sally, what weight do you use in your bobbin thread? Mostly I use the same as I have on the top. That's what I have now, the identical thread. Sometimes I use Deco Bob pre-wound bobbins, which are an 80 weight, a very fine thread in the bobbin. Those are my 2 most common. Nana, question, how long are the petals? Oh gosh, more than an inch, and then there's a generous 1/4 inch echo around that. So the petals are perhaps 1 1/4 inches, something like that. In the Quilt Summit video, you showed a quilt with a freehand pattern called Boomerang. Can we find that on YouTube or Advance? Advance being my monthly subscription membership, yes, it is in Advance, and it is called Boomerang. If you look in Freehand Designs, that course, it's in there. Okay, let's see some guesses. I'm looking forward to this. 1 million, 5 million, 15 million. We're going up. 7.5, 2.5 millions, all of these. 3 million, 8 million, 2.5 billion. Ooh, I like your thinking, Gloria. 1.5 million, 10 million, 11 million. Meant 9998. Sorry, I like that. Nita. Adele, 8 million, 45 million. 45 million, another Debbie. 2.750 million stitches. Boy, Sue, you're specific. 80 million. 15 million. Elaine, how many quilts did you say you've done in a year, please? I did 110 last year, and I think I did about 150 or 160 the year before. So something like 250 to 275. Bev, although a completely uneducated guess, here goes. 5 million beautiful stitches by Susan. Aw, Bev, you're so sweet. Or Beverly, you might go by that, sorry. Debbie, I guessed 45 million, but I'm thinking you're probably closer at 80. This is like the jelly bean jar. I love it. Janice, I'm thinking I want to up my guess to 14 million. Adele, I changed my mind. I think it's 150 million. Well, I will say the person with the billion overshot a little bit. I will say that. Okay, there's more coming. Cat, 13 million. This is way fun. I wish I had a prize for you. Judy, 7.5 million. Jacqueline, 4.5 million. You guys are great. Okay, I wish I could show you my screen. I can't. But the answer is 18 million and change. So now you know. Quite a ways from a billion. Oh, sorry, there's more questions. Sue, a few minutes ago you did a spiral, but instead of doing petals, you took off in a different direction, then started a new flower. You know, Sue, I'm not 100% sure what you were referring to, but sometimes I've done the flower so many times, I know which end I'm going to come out at and which direction I'm heading. So sometimes I'll do that spiral and then echo back because that's where I want to end up. Do you know what I mean? So probably I was just echoing either spiral or flower, one extra echo. Shelly, I like watching how you unstitch. It's easier than how I used to do it. I do actually have a YouTube video about unstitching. I've kind of made a science of it. Practice makes quite good at it. More questions? Yes. If you do that again, can you tell your train of thought and why you did that? I know it's to make it fit, but your thoughts. Sure, I'll talk about it. If I do it again, I'll try and stop and point it out. I'm not 100% sure how much you can see it, but in many of my designs, I will just echo whatever shape I'm quilting, petal, spiral, feather, to get to the direction I want to go to next. So it's simply an echo, I'm sure. Nita, does anyone know the name of this quilt pattern Susan is using? Do you mean the piecing pattern, Nita? I assume that's what you mean. Oh, okay. Mr. Producer saying you're talking about the quilting design, which is my own hibiscus design, and the quilt pattern. I just know looking at these blocks, they have partial seams in them because they kind of spiral around the central square. Can we do an overhead shot of the quilt as a whole while I've got Stella off to the side a little bit? There you go. So you can kind of see the flower, right? This little square in the middle, and then they spiral around that. It's a very pretty pattern. Okay, let's keep quilting. Come on, Stella, you can do this. We'll go back onto our regulated stitch for a little bit and see if that makes a difference. I threw my blue seam ripper on here so I could see where it was, and then I picked it up and moved it. Wasn't that smart? But I found it. I feel like my bobbin must be nearly empty too. But we'll go till it runs out. So again, I'm overlapping about 1/4 inch. I'm lock stitching 4 or 5 times, and I leave my thread tails until I've done a little bit more stitching. They tend to break out if you pull out if you trim them too close, too early. That's been my experience anyway. All right, let's get oriented where I'm going next here. Here's an example. I've just quilted the spiral. If I petal this way and echo back, I'm going to be on this side, and I want to be going that direction. So an easy way to change that is, number one, I could just echo the petals after they're done, but also I can do it right now and echo my spiral. Just get to the other side for starting my petals. And I do that with lots of my designs. In one way or another, I just echo around them. And now my bobbin just ran out. You see that? Just like that. So this is Susan's way of doing things. I absolutely do have a measurement on my machine for how much the bobbin holds. It's not a sensor. I have to tell it an average number of yards that are on my bobbin, and then it sort of calculates by how many stitches I've taken, how close it thinks I am to the end. It's all a bit of a process. Susan's method is just quilt till the bobbin runs out, back up a couple inches to where there was good tension, and put a new bobbin in. And what I mean by backing up to where there was good tension, those last few inches on the bobbin didn't have good tension on them, right? Because it was the last couple inches feeding through. So I always back up a little bit to where the stitches look pretty. And now I'm trying to put the bobbin in blind, and I'm struggling with that. And actually, I'm going to pull Stella all the way out and add a drop of oil. Since she is rattling just a little bit. I was mentioning earlier I was proofreading, for lack of a better word, a whole bunch of videos today because I am pulling together, I guess I better put the bobbin back in. I'm pulling together a new course that I'm calling Machine Quilting for Beginners, Everything You Need to Know to Get Started. And so those of you who have taken my free motion quilting masterclass, it is much more about building your repertoire of quilting designs, where this new course is about setting up your machine, learning how to load a quilt on the long arm or baste it to work at your sit-down machine, or what types of batting to use, or threads and needles and all those sorts of things. So I hope to be releasing that in a couple of weeks' time, because I just get a lot of people that ask a lot of the same questions, and I thought, you know, this would be an easy way to answer all those questions. So that's what I'm working on. And I've got my thread inside the hoop. Let's get it out of there. I could just start sewing, but if I stitch it in, then it's going to be a pain to get out, right? Excuse me. Did I shift the camera, hon? Am I jerking? I'm sorry. Sorry about that, you guys. We're not on manual mode. Just got to get my thoughts together here. There we go. Take a sec and trim those tails. The bobbin thread broke. So this is interesting. I'm going to tell you guys a story. I was finding this happen the other day to me. It seemed like every time I put a new bobbin in, I would get 1 or 2 thread breaks in short order. So what I'm messing around with is adjusting how full my bobbin gets, because if the bobbin is too full, it tends to break early on. I don't know if that's because there's a tiny bit of friction. You know, the bobbin is just too plump. I don't feel like it is that full. Anyway, I lessened it a little bit so it triggers the cutter, signals the bobbin to stop winding a little sooner. And, you know, tomorrow when I'm quilting, or the next day, I will do that a little further and see if that helps with this problem. My bobbin shouldn't break just because it's a new bobbin. Or at least there should be a solution to that. And yeah, see, my bobbin thread is broken off right short. And it does not seem that full to me. So let's give it a whirl again. Tension is fine. You guys notice I don't very often load up my toa gauge. I am so used to, because I do so many bobbins, I'm so used to what this should feel like. It seldom catches me out. I just know exactly what that should feel like without benefit of my toa gauge. Can't seem to find where to put the bobbin though without being able to see it. There it is. I do have a little playlist going on my YouTube channel that I call Know Your Machine. And it's for things like this. For example, when I'm pulling up my bobbin thread here, I pull on that too. And I know what that should feel like. And I can tell you right now, it feels too hard. Something's wrong. So I'm not even going to start stitching. I'm just going to reinsert that bobbin. because something's wrong. And knowing your machine and what things should feel like can save you a lot of heartache. Let's see if we can figure out what the problem is. Can you see that? My thread has literally wound around the bobbin post. And there was that problem. I don't know what was the problem earlier. If I'm not careful, I'm going to pop the spring, and I don't want to do that. And this too really comes under the heading of knowing your machine, like knowing that that little spring is there to keep your bobbin from spinning around when it shouldn't. Knowing that it's essential. You cannot sew and get good tension without that little spring in there. All those things are good things to know about your machine. Let's try again. Now how does it feel? That feels beautiful. How many thread breaks have we had already on this quilt? 4? Some days, as our son always says, some days she do be like this. Now here again, you're going to see me doing some echoing. I've judged that I don't have enough space between where I'm stitching and the front rail of my quilt to put a whole nother flower in. So I'm going to echo my way back up and start another flower nearer to the top. Okay, there. How to describe to you what this is. I felt some resistance. I don't see anything wrong, but I know that I should not feel that. And look at that, my bobbin thread has already broken. So something happened right in there. This just comes from knowing exactly what your machine should feel like. Sometimes you can halt before it actually breaks and you can figure out what's going on. I don't really know what's going on. It's just how tonight is going. There's that bobbin thread end. Every so often, it doesn't happen very often because my Bernina does a great job of winding bobbins, but every so often I have gotten a bobbin that maybe I didn't have it seated just right on the winding post or something, and I get mixed tension on it. So what I'm going to do is just pull out, I don't know, 6 or 8 yards off my bobbin and just see if we can get past whatever that awkwardness is that's going on. It is definitely not over full anymore. Mr. Producer's asking if there's any fuzz in the bobbin area. I did just clean it. But I tell you what, if this does continue to happen, I probably will get it off my quilt and off to the side and get down there and really have a good look at it. Go and see where I am. Okay. lint fell in there. Looks like I need to do a thorough house cleaning on Stella. She's dropping linty bits. I cannot get that little linty bit to not stick to my finger. Stop. All right, we're going to move Stella off to the side. While we advance, this is a great time if you do indeed have some questions. I very much doubt that we are going to 100% finish this quilt tonight because it is on the larger side, larger than some of the ones I do. But you can see if you are looking at the full view now, it's laying beautifully flat, and I'm happy with the squareness. Let's just double check. I might have gone a little too far in spots. Yeah, I have one little spot that's going to be too far. Back up an inch or two. Good to go. All right. So when I advance a quilt, especially with one like this that I know has got a little bit of non-flatness, I just really pay attention every time I advance to getting things lined up straight. So one of my first gauges is looking along the rail of my long arm and seeing if whatever seam lines line up with that are pretty even. So I don't want this middle to get pulled down, right, and have visibly kind of a bow in this seam. So knowing that my center is a little full, I'm just going to watch every time I advance my quilt to make sure that I'm getting the sides tugged down well and getting the bottom pushed up just a little, just a little. It's so small. I also am grasping my batting and giving it a nice little tug under there too. I want to make sure that it's well pulled down. And it's looking good. In front of me, what's hanging in the front is looking good. So, we're in good shape. I'll go ahead and baste and put my side clamps on, and then we'll take a minute to chat. Can you see how I'm pulling this just a little with my thumbnail? And can you see what a difference it makes when I pull on it? It just pulls it under the needle a little faster than if I don't. See that bulge starting to form? You don't want to let that happen. That will come back and bite you. And if you're not comfortable putting your thumbnail in there, I also sometimes reach under the batting and grab those 2 layers and pull on it a little bit. That works too. So now we've got just the tiniest bit of ease along here. You can't even really see it. But if I didn't take that little ease, these piano keys would gradually start to stretch downwards and they wouldn't look nice and straight and aligned anymore after 2 or 3 passes of letting them get a 1/4 inch out of hand. Ooh, that's enough to make you dizzy. Sorry about that. These magnetic bars that I'm using, the red snappers, the side clips that I'm using, links for all of these are in the description below most of my YouTube episodes, but certainly below today's. So you can find them if you need to. Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Move Stella out of the way. Let me get a sip of water while we talk. I'll be right back. Bernina says first servicing should be at 30 million stitches. That means your machine is still a newbie. You're right. You're right. It is. A few more years left to go. Lorna, how many stitches per inch do you set it on in manual mode? So in manual mode, you're not setting stitches per inch. You're setting how fast, how many stitches it's making per minute, and you're controlling how many stitches per inch by how quickly you move while that needle is moving. So I like 10 stitches per inch, so that's what I'm trying to get it to look like, but I can't set it at 10 stitches per inch. Does that make sense? Debbie, do you readjust your top tension when you add a new bobbin? Not usually, Debbie, unless it's not looking right on the surface of my quilt. Does your machine show you the % of bobbin left? Alice is asking. It does if I do some of those things that I described. I figure out about how much my bobbin is holding. Every time I put a new bobbin in, I have to go back and set it at 100%. It does not account for example, the thread tails that you pull. It's just counting so many stitches and saying you can get X number of stitches out of 200 yards of thread. So I don't. It would give me that percentage, but I don't find it accurate enough to be helpful. That's just my preference. Selwyn, I have found that my bobbins are better if not too full, even if they don't look too full. I completely agree, and I felt like I had a little lip on the edge that wasn't full, but clearly it's behaving better as it's going down a little bit, so that must have been the issue. Okay, apparently there's quite a few comments about the bobbin. Let's see it. Also have a Q24. Can you show us how you adjust the amount of thread that winds onto your bobbin? I think I can probably catch that on camera, yes. Janice, try to hold a little tension on the thread when loading a bobbin. Otherwise, it may get caught in the spring or around the post. I totally see what you're saying, Janice, and I must have let go of it a bit. Janice, Had these issues, turned out my bobbin was wearing down, replaced, and everything is fine. I do, by the way, keep a spare bobbin case, and on a day when I just can't figure out something about my ugly stitches, sometimes just changing a bobbin casing will fix it, and I go back and forth between the two. Excuse me. Must be deafening in your ears, I'm sorry. Carrie's asking, is that wool batting? No, it's not. It's by Windline. It's 80-20, 80% cotton, 100% poly. Angela, did your client let you know about the fullness? If not, how do you manage that with the client? Do you let them know you'll be easing it in, or do you have that in your contract somehow? Honestly, Angela, I consider this to be quite minor. It's very doable to get a square and flat quilt out of this. If I had a significant hourglass shape, or I recently quilted one that had like triple borders around the outside, and in the middle it was about 4 inches larger in the middle in both directions, I did talk to that person and I said, you know, there's gonna be some significant easing and there may even be pleats, and just make them aware, and they were totally fine. But this one is really manageable, easily manageable. Tanique, hi Susan. Can't believe I caught a live. I was in your first masterclass. Yes, you were, and I remember your name. I'm so glad you joined in. April, I'm about to become a long armor. Your videos have been so helpful, educational, and inspirational. I'm so glad, April. Let me know if there's any way I can help or questions I can answer. Elaine, best tip I learned from you for basting with fullness was the fingernail crawl. And Elaine, gotta be honest, I don't think that was original to me. I pick up these things from other quilters too and just pass them on. Jenny, for bobbin tension issues, how can you confirm that it's a winding problem? I can't. It's just in my list of things to try, and if that fixes it, then I know that was it. If nothing else is fixing it, I try that. Grant, is the top directional? Did you load the quilt sideways? I noticed the stars along the top each look cropped, and the side edges have piano keys. It is, in fact, loaded sideways, yes. Lengthwise is from side to side on the quilt. And June, hi Susan and Dave. The machine sounds clicky and louder than usual. June, it honestly does sound a little clicky tonight, and usually that's when it either A, needs oil, or B, the bobbin is getting low. Excuse me. And sometimes it will happen to me, and I need to oil several times in quick succession before it lessens. I don't think it's problematic, so I'm not worrying about it at this point. We saw this one already.
I have a number of questions on the quilt.
Okay, questions about this quilt? Okay, so Beverly's asking, did you make the double wedding ring behind you? Yes and no. There is a story behind this quilt, as there are behind so many. This was early in my long arming journey. My local town, Spokane, Washington, we have a long arm quilting guild. And the year before I started long arming, they formed a treasure quilt challenge, which just meant, well, and I joined it in its second year. Everyone got in a blind draw some vintage quilt top. And this double wedding ring is the one I drew. So it was not a finished quilt, it was just a quilt top. It was stained, it was dirty, it had a border which you can't see in the the shot that we've got right now, but the border was almost a ruffle. There was so much excess. So all I was allowed to do was take off the border and cut out that extra and put it back on. I couldn't restitch anything else. So a whole bunch of this quilting design was me learning and experimenting and finding ways to take up fullness. These white areas were super full and puffy, so I quilted them to death. And her name is Audrey, and she's one of my favorite quilts ever. I'm curious if you get any back pains from leaning over the machine while quilting. Generally, no. So, number one, tonight you're seeing me really hunker in because this is difficult to see because I've got super bright lights on for filming. If I was doing this on my own and not on camera, I would turn out some of those lights and try to make it easier on myself, so I am really hunkering in there. However, I do notoriously have poor posture at a long arm, and one of the ways I deal with that is I have my long arm set higher than most people do. It just helps me to stay more upright. You can see it, it's well into my rib cage, where a lot of long arm retailers will tell you it should be elbow height, and mine's a solid 2, maybe even 3 inches above the base of my elbow. That's my preference. I feel better doing it at a higher height. So that's one of the ways. And also I take frequent breaks. I seldom stand and quilt for several hours when I'm on my own. I'll stop and do other things or stretches or neck rolls or move around.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, let's put the water down.
No, I
one more question? Yes, you saw Elaine's. Okay, one other thing that I like to do when I'm quilting an overall or edge-to-edge design is move each pass in differing directions. So my first pass I started top right and moved left. So this pass I'm going to start left and move right. It just kind of keeps whatever I'm quilting, whatever design, organic, and it doesn't look like it's got a stiff wind blowing across it. So hopefully we'll have less bobbin clicking this time. I've already oiled twice this evening, so we shall see. Oh, I'm on a basting stitch still. I think it was June who said it seems more clicky than normal. I completely agree. So I'll just keep on adding a drop of oil with every bobbin. I don't think that that was the issue with the broken thread. I don't think. Okay, this pass we were going to talk about the cruise, so I'll give you a little bit of information, and if you have any questions, absolutely feel free to ask them. And if you're a new viewer, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. Dave and I hosted a Caribbean cruise. We just came home 2 weeks ago tomorrow, so just a few weeks ago we started. We had 64 quilters in total, and there were 110 people in our group, so a number of husbands, friends, sisters, plus ones in various ways. So that was our crowd. And I had two teachers along. One was Sam Alberts, who's kind of she's definitely younger than I am and a more perhaps contemporary quilter. She does a lot of ruler work and custom work, gorgeous quilting. And also Beth Ann Nemish, who many of you perhaps know for her feathers or her florals or her yarn couching. She is such a fabulous quilter. I was honored to have her along. So the three of us had a great time. We each presented several different classes. Each of us had a trunk show. And we added something new that I've not seen in quilting cruises before, even machine quilting cruises or piecing project type cruises. And that is, we had these kind of a la carte, optional, we called them business breakouts. So each of us did one, each of us 3 teachers, plus we had a videographer along, plus we had a service person technician along, and she did one. So these were just shorter, very informal sessions on different topics related to being an entrepreneur in the crafting and quilting arena. And we kind of didn't know how that would fly because no one's done it before that I know of. And so we had them slotted for 7:30 every morning, you guys, early in the morning. And I would say of our 64 people, we had, do you agree, Mr. Producer? We had 40 every day, 35 or 40 or more every day, show up at 7:30 for those little ad hoc business breakouts. They were fabulous. So mine was on photographing quilts with your smartphone. Just some easy, really easy ways that you can level up your photos with just a couple tiny tips. So it was things like that. Beth Ann talked about client communication. Sam talked about creating videos and storing and organizing and creating a video library and batch producing content ahead. Little side note, I don't know anyone else who does this, but Sam has already scheduled all of her social media content for all of 2025. We're just in February. She did that all in December. She is crazy out in front of it. Anyway, But it was really fun to see the interest in that, because that was something we just did not know if there was a lot of interest or no. And apparently there is. So that was fun. We got to see, of course, some gorgeous weather and places. I am going to actually take that out. See that almost wrinkle there? That's too much for me. So bear with me while I undo that just a touch. Oops. So we saw Dominican Republic, we saw Puerto Rico, and we saw St. Martin, the island of St. Martin. So of course, beaches and excursions and amazing cruise food. Oh my gosh. Music. Mr. Producer is very musical. You guys maybe know that already. And his sister and her husband and his brother and his wife were along. So those guys got going with the band on the boat. And a good time was had. Really good time. What else was memorable, Mr. Producer, sir? Oh, I mentioned the food already. The food was very memorable. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going back to a point. I'll move the camera right there. A point. That's the best place to splice it, in my opinion. And we'll see if we can get easing, but not an actual pleat like that this time around. So again, I'm leaving a few stitches after the point. I'm going to stitch over those again to secure this. Elaine's joking. Maybe Stella's a little jealous that I went on a cruise without her. Maybe the cat is too. Tell you what, the cat was all over me when I got home. Our daughter and son-in-law have been living with us the last little while, so they were here with the cat, and they get on famously with him, but boy, he was all over me like white on rice when I got home, let me tell you. Better. We'll let all those happy prints sort of camouflage that. Cut the tails. So something else that we kind of pioneered that as far as I know, has not been done before is that we videoed all the classes. And I did mention we had a videographer along who took some of those. Mr. Producer did some of them too. And our friend Clement is creating, I would say, professional quality videos out of all of them, so that all the students who were on the cruise can have access to those for some time to come. So they have an opportunity then to go back and review those lessons as many times as they want to. And I feel like that's a real advantage. That's what you sometimes lose when you do take in-person classes is, you know, you sit there and you soak it in, and it's a bit like drinking from a fire hose for a couple of hours, and then you go home the next day and you're like, okay, what all was that I wanted to remember? And especially if you have multiple classes, multiple teachers, and days worth. So hopefully our cruisers find that to be super valuable in the months to come. If you watching this are interested in some of those business-related topics, I have very recently started re-releasing is not the right word. I have recorded and am releasing new podcast episodes. So I'm calling this Season 5. and I'm planning 20 episodes in season 5, and they are a little more business focused than my podcast was last time that I was releasing episodes. So, there's still a lot of stories, and hopefully they're still engaging and entertaining for those who are not business owners. But if you are one, at whatever level, I think that you'll find some really valuable information in there. This current week, the episode was with a friend and coach by the name of Tracy Beavers. And she just has some fabulous tips on visibility in the online space. And it's not all, some of it is, but it's not all just how to do it. It's more about like your mindset of serving and of creating connections. And that just so resonates with me, because even though quilting is my business, it is my livelihood, I do it because I want to help people, not because I want to line my pockets. Do you know what I mean? And so it matters to me to have that sort of mindset, and I hope that you all viewing and those of you who have been in my classes feel that too. So Tracy has such a great way of expressing some of that. So that was Wednesday's podcast. Last week's was just me, and I was talking about honestly and fairly and realistically pricing your quilting services. And I created a spreadsheet to go with that one that can really literally help you practically work through, okay, this is what I need to earn or would like to earn for my quilting service, and then how do I know what all my costs are going into it, and how do I decide what rate to charge. So with that spreadsheet, you can plug in some numbers and see, what your hourly rate is coming to at those numbers. And then if that's not satisfactory, you can change some of those numbers and plug in some different variables, and it gives you a quick way to evaluate that. So those sorts of things. Easiest way to find my podcast is on my brand new website, StitchedBySusan.com. There is a podcast page. You also can find it on Apple and Spotify and all the places, and it is called Measure Twice, Cut Once. I was just visiting my dad last week, and he is 94, almost 95, and I don't think he has the foggiest idea what a podcast is, but every time I say the name of mine, it reminds me of him. He used to do fine finishing carpentry, and he would always say, cut it twice and it's still too short. So saying measure twice, cut once just always reminds me of my dad. I'm going to lock stitch here and break thread and go give Stella another wee drink of oil. Get myself a wee drink of water. Probably a good time for some questions, and then I'm thinking we'll just finish this one pass and probably call it for tonight. Maybe I'll do one more advance so you can see that process again. I'm just going to pull Stella off to the side and give her another wee drop of oil. Got any questions or comments that we want to pause and look at? Oh, there we go. So me in the middle, clearly. Sam in the peachy colored shirt, and Beth Ann in the pink. We were the three teachers. We had a great time. Yep. Okay, some questions or comments or thoughts. Quilts for Survivors. Hi, Susan. Wanted to thank you for your masterclass. It has helped me immensely. I've been able to share long arming with 10 others, 4 of them being youth. Over 6,700 quilts presented to survivors. That's amazing. Now, Quilts for Survivors, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a Canadian organization, right? Maybe you want to put some details in the chat. Maybe others would like to know a little bit more about what you're doing. That would be great. Lorna, I agree with the higher table. I started at elbow height and was miserable. Watched my first couple episodes of Live and Unscripted and raised my table. It is absolutely worth at least experimenting with and trying, because different people have different preferences, but I know I love mine higher. I definitely do. Judy, I watched Sam the other day. She does wonderful work. She does indeed. Quilting Curve Studio is her name, and she has a YouTube channel as well. Beth Ann Nemish is White Arbor Quilting. She's on Instagram and Facebook a lot, not so much on YouTube. Carolyn, I was on the cruise and I got quilter's block when I got home. I love this design and we'll have to try it. Good. Good. Oh, I haven't even told the C6 stories. I'll get to those. Carolyn would have seen that in action. Mary Ellen, consider offering the sessions via video after the cruise. People could pay a fee for its availability. Hadn't thought about that. Don't know if I'll do that, because you kind of had to be there. Some of them built one on another and had to do with things that we were doing between the classes too. Oh, but we'll think about that. We'll think about that. Elaine, I've been watching over a year. I'm getting ready to try free motion on Cheater Quilter from Honest Fabrics. Do you have a suggestion for a simple design I can start with? I mean, if you're wanting super easy, Elaine, I suggest single loops or double loops. And then from there going into adding things, like adding a leaf every so often, or a heart every so often, or a flower every so often. It's a great, easy way with smooth motions and no points and things to practice on. Oops. And we do love Honest Fabrics also. That's Carly Porter. Elaine, I get my left and right confused like a 4-year-old sometimes, just being truthful. I mean, don't we all? Like, we're really learning, I feel like, as free motion quilters. We're training ourselves to be ambidextrous, and if you're predominantly right-handed or your left hand is predominant, it's always going to be easier in one direction. So it's a growth process, learning to be able to quilt both ways, and up and down, all the things. It's a process. Tanique, how do you decide when a flower's petals should swoop towards the center like this one versus straight to the center like a daisy? I think it's a matter of preference. I just find it easier to quilt with that kind of spinning quality to the petals. I do a feather type blossom similarly too, and they also spin. That just feels easier to me and easier to nest them, but I think it's just preference to me. You try it both ways. Mimi, what pattern or block is the quilt? It's delightful to see it being quilted. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. I was hoping maybe someone would chime in the comments what it is. I don't know what the pattern is. I'm sorry. Okay, Benita, may I ask how you quilted the double wedding ring on the wall behind you? Sometimes I have the hardest time deciding how to quilt this pattern. An interesting question, Benita, because, and I'm going a bit down a rabbit trail here, but since it is behind me and you can all see it, this one is definitely highly detailed custom quilting. Quite a lot of hours went into this quilt, especially because I was a pretty novice quilter when I did it, and so there was much I didn't know, and I knew a lot more when this quilt was finished, let's just say. So I would not say that every double wedding ring by any means needs quilting like this. So at the far end, at the far extreme, I've done several double wedding rings where I've literally quilted an edge-to-edge design. And I usually lean towards something with a traditional feel, like my all over feathers, for example. And I'll do that more often on a vintage one, simply because either, maybe it's got fragile seams and it literally can't stand up to stitching in the ditch along those seam lines. That would just make those seams, I feel like, weaker. So I like to do an edge to edge sometimes just to reinforce the whole thing. Or sometimes I've done some, in fact, I'm pretty sure I have a 2-part YouTube episode, Vintage Gems, I believe it was called, and it was a double wedding ring that had so much fullness and unevenness. I just thought it would be a hair puller to try to custom quilt around those shapes. So I just did an overall design on it, and it was beautiful. The result was beautiful. So I don't think you can go wrong. I really don't think you can go wrong. That's two extremes of level of quilting and detail and time, and they both look great. Debbie, it was nice being able to watch this evening. I had to say goodbye to my fur baby. Oh, I'm sorry, Clifford, today, and it's been rough. He was my quilting buddy, and my studio seemed empty without him. Watching you quilt is peaceful. I'm so glad, Debbie. I know how that feels. We've lost pets, too. I bet everybody listening has too. So, all right, let's keep quilting. And by the way, the black cat is still here beside me, like he's just off the edge of the quilt where I don't, bump into him when I walk. He's just laying there, loafing around. Yeah, you can't quite see him. Okay, as I work toward my right-hand side, Dave has got a light set up here on the side, and he's going to fiddle around with having it shine on this and see how it works and see if the quilting shows up more for you. Where did I stop? I did not set my blue seam ripper down. For shame. Maybe I should mess around with the lights before I start quilting. Like, do you want my machine lights off to see how that looks? Okay, let's play around with this, you guys. It takes a few minutes for your comments to come in, so we'll make some changes and we'll ask you questions, and then we'll wait until we change it back for a little bit. Hang on a second, gotta figure out where this is. So now my machine lights are off. I feel like that would work better if I was going the other way. So maybe it needs to be at the other end, because now I'm quilting toward the light and they're still not going to be able to see it. Interesting. But you can see what a difference that is making though, right? How just adjusting the light makes a massive difference in how the things look. So playing around with that can make a huge difference when you're having trouble seeing a quilt. We're just messing around with stuff here. Take this camera out for a spin and see what it can do. That's very, very dark. Let's give it a try.
Well, you'll be able to see the stitching, right?
Okay, you guys are seeing half of that. Okay, we're going to play with this and see what works. For a minute. Let us know in the comments. We'll run for a minute or two at least so that we can give you a minute to respond and for us to register the comments. And then we'll go from there. I'll make one more change. If I go on manual mode, then you will not see those little red lights. I'm going to go just a little slower than I was before. Okay, give us some feedback on what that's looking like. We have not quite achieved what I do when I have really difficult to see situations, because there are still some room lights on here. So I'm curious how this is working for you guys, because I can't see worth the darn, frankly. Are you getting comments in? So it certainly does show reasonably well on the camera, but I'm having real difficulty seeing where I'm quilting, so it's not a good solution for long term. Yeah. Not really. So it's an experiment, but now you guys can see what a change it can make just to shift your lighting balances. So give us a moment while we change things back. Look at that, bright white again. We've been doing live and unscripted for a little over 4 years, I think. And in that time, like if you go back and watch earlier ones, you'll see that we really experimented with lighting, with cameras, with angles, trying to find this balance between me being able to see what I'm quilting and you being able to see what I'm doing as well. Okay, now we're back to our original setting. Excuse me, so sorry. Someone's asking about my side clamps. Bless your hearts, I have one of them on and one of them not. See, I was busy talking. Let's quickly put this one on. It is important stuff. You guys keep me toeing the line. It's very good. So a few people have asked what this quilt pattern is, the piecing design, and I do not know, but if any of you watching do know, it would be great if you would chime in and let those who are curious know about it. So I am quilting my own hibiscus quilting design, and it is entirely freehand, so if you're just tuning in, that's what we're doing. And I call these episodes live and unscripted because I am streaming this quilting live and in real time. Nothing is edited out. And if you want proof, watch an earlier part of the show where I had quite a few thread breaks. And they all stay in because that's what it really looks like some days when you're quilting. So that can be encouraging for many of you. So a few statistics. I'm quilting on a Bernina Q24. The 24 just means that's the throat depth from the needle to the back of the machine. So Q24. I do have computerized or digital capabilities, but tonight I'm stitching absolutely freehand. That's what I love doing. I'm using Isocord 100% poly thread in an eggshell color. And I have the same thread exactly in the top and the bobbin. And right now I'm stitching in manual mode, which means I set my machine for, let's look, I'm at 1200 stitches per minute right now. and I'm controlling the stitch length by the speed of my movements. So if I were to move quickly, I would get long galloping stitches. If I move very slowly, I would get very tight and fine stitches. So I'm trying to keep those consistent as I work. If you are enjoying this episode and this style of live and unscripted quilting, I would love if you would give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you'll click the little notification bell, YouTube will kindly let you know whenever I'm going live. I also try to publish that in my newsletters a day or two in advance of each live session, with a photo of what I'll be working on and some of the details of the topics that I think will be part of the episode. So in tonight's case, we went right from the beginning, from loading the backing and the batting up to into the quilting. Talked a little bit about advances, talked a little bit about when a quilt is not perfectly flat, how to compensate a little bit or gauge it a little bit with each pass to get a really nice square result and not get a nasty surprise when you get to the bottom of the quilt. And of course, as aforementioned, I have had a number of thread breaks, and so I've talked through some common solutions for that, common places to look for the culprit. And always these episodes are interactive. That's a whole bunch of the fun of it, is the opportunity for you guys to chat, give me your tips and comments, ask your questions, remind me to put my side clamps on, all those things. I sent out a newsletter yesterday talking about this project, but also talking about another one that I'm going to try, and it's something a little different for me on YouTube, and that is doing a sew-along. I love making scrappy quilts, and I have quite a lot of scraps that are strippy. Over the years, quite a few of my clients will have me trim up their quilt, so trim the excess off the edges, and I will often keep the skinniest strip. So it might be, 1.5 to 2 or 3 inches wide. So I have a lot of those strips. And I thought, time to make a scrappy quilt. So in my newsletter, I offered a poll, a vote, with 2 pictures. This one or that one. And I think I put both on there as well. So if you haven't opened yesterday's newsletter, run grab that and vote for your opinion. And then my thinking is, I'm going to start it on a Friday evening, much like this one. So the 28th of February, that's 2 weeks from today. And we'll just kind of see how it goes, because that's new for me, right? Trying to do sorting of scraps and making decisions and sewing it on the fly. And if it goes well, we're going to do several live sessions and try and make that quilt together. If it feels awkward, then I might pre-make the videos and release them. But either way, I'll give you all the instructions if you want them, all the measurements that I'm using. They are my own patterns. However, the ideas for them are from ones that are out there, like in free use on the internet. I've just kind of made them my own with specific measurements and quilt sizes. So I'll give all that kind of stuff, those details, while we're piecing. So for February 28th then, the topic is very much going to be how I decide on kind of a color theme, and then how I assess my fabrics to choose what's going to actually be in it. So that's the plan. So you don't need to do anything at all to join, except I think you'll want to be getting my newsletter so that you hear details about what's coming up next and when it will be. And you can join my newsletter very easily by going to my website, StitchedBySusan.com, and you'll get a little pop-up inviting you to join the newsletter. So like these live and unscripteds, it will air live, the one on February 28th. Oh, look at that, the light changed. It will air live, but it will continue to live on YouTube. So if you can't make it to the live session, not the end of the world. You can always go back and watch it later and join in on making the scrappy quilt. And I think what I'm going to do also is offer to quilt one of them as a live and unscripted episode. And I'm not exactly sure how I'll do that yet. Probably my assistant Erin will figure out the fine print there and how we will randomize the people who are joining in and how you will let us know you're joining in. And then we'll do a draw and I'll quilt somebody's quilt for them on a live and unscripted episode. I thought that would be fun. And or I'll do mine. Red tail keeps coming in there. Wants to get quilted in. Okay, we are at the end of that pass. Get one more little one in over here. Perfect. All right, let's do one more advance. And then I think we'll be about finished for tonight. For us, it's very nearly supper time, so starting to feel hungry. And there are still 2, probably 3 passes to do, so we're not yet at the halfway mark. I'm just going to leave Stella's needle down and let her roll up with the quilt. I'll check that I haven't gone too far anywhere. No, I think we're good. So again, I like to always tug both quilt and batting to make sure that batting is pulled down smooth. It tends to stretch out a little bit at the sides and to squinch up a little bit in the middle. So if you're not confident of what it's doing, you can always flip the top up if you're floating it like I do and see that batting and make sure you're not getting any odd ripples under there. So again, I'm looking along my rails. I'm making sure that my piano key lines are straight with the rails and that my edges to my triangles, in this case, that I can see next to this rail are running in a straight line. And again, the middle has just a touch, just a little touch of fullness that I'm easing up in a little bit with each pass. Looking good. Looking real fine. All So one last chance for any comments and questions. One last chance to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this episode. Again, if you're just joining in, I was talking a little bit ago about some of the more business type classes that we offered on our cruise a couple of weeks back, and also my podcast this season is a little more business or entrepreneurial oriented. So the podcast is called Measure Twice, Cut Once. New episode is coming out every Wednesday, and there are 20 total episodes in this season. I believe it was number 6 that came out this past Wednesday. It was a conversation with not a quilter, but a business coach, just about visibility in the online space and creating relationship and trust and how to serve your customers well with my friend Tracy Beavers. It was so awesome. Okay, any questions or comments that we want to talk about? Okay, right now, you guys, right here is a black tail. If I were to start quilting, I'd tread on it right now. Does he know that? I have no way to show them. I have no way to show you, but it's pretty funny. Okay, Comments. Kathy, this has been very helpful. It's reassuring to see that even the professionals have days with thread breaks. I'm so sorry. And an unwanted tuck. Yes. That's why I do these live and unscripted. Like, this is how days go sometimes. Do you find that some bats are more linty than others even though they have the same fiber content? I just tried a different brand and this new one is super linty. I gotta tell you, I'm a creature of habit. I used Hobbs 80/20 for years and years, and now I'm quite fond of Winline. I don't really try a bunch of different brands. I found those two to be pretty similar. I like the feel of the Winline. It's a little bit softer. So, no, is the short answer. I have not found that, but only because I haven't tried them. Nancy, did you mention how you were going to quilt the border? Nancy, I'm quilting the border just like the quilt. So it literally is an edge-to-edge design. Same hibiscus flower from one edge to the other. Nothing different in the borders. Susan, thanks for letting us in your sewing room. I'm working on my she shed. How fun for my sewing room. Had to stop for the winter. You make it look so easy. I've learned lots from watching you. Awesome. Well, if you're getting into the long arm or machine quilting world, I hope you'll stick around and feel free to join and asking questions at any time. That's what I'm here for. Shelley, are you going to talk about being seasick? Oh, yes, Shelley. You do want to hear the most embarrassing things, don't you? So I had the first class on the ship, and we took 2 long arms on board. And so my intention with my class was to actually quilt a small project, kind of like a live and unscripted, but on a bit shorter scale so that I could be sure to be done in my 90-minute segment. And I am not prone to getting seasick, but it was pretty rough the whole week, comparatively speaking, for a cruise ship. And we were on the 14th floor, our classroom, so we got quite a bit of movement. And it is surprisingly difficult to manhandle a long arm, which I learned. And also, it felt like reading in a car. You know how when you're looking down at your book, you get a little bit sick, and if you look up, you feel better, and if you look down, you get sick again? That's exactly what it was like, and I was so sick. It wasn't even funny. So we got smart, Dave and I, and for my next class, one of the days that we were at Anchor, we actually videoed my class material, and then I could play the video and stop and rewind and point it out, and it actually worked really well. So, you know, you pivot. There I am, quilting waves, no less. I mean, it was very meta. Quilting waves. Seasick as anything. Okay, more thoughts or questions? Dave's so busy putting up silly pictures. That was very, very dark.
Not silly.
Anyway, it was a good time. And you know what we did, actually, while he's busy putting up pictures? It was a small quilt, and it was quite patriotic. It was one of Janet Nesbitt's crazy quilt style. What did she call it? Crazy Stars and Stripes, I think, is literally what the pattern was called. So smallish, but an American flag. And so I quilted that whole thing. And what we decided to do was raffle it off. So initially, when we were planning this cruise a year and a bit ago, One Common Thread was going to come along. It's a not-for-profit organization run by 2 sisters. They send fabric and supplies to women in Honduras who piece or prep hexies, sometimes prep them into quilts, sometimes prep them into kits. And anyway, one of those sisters was going to come along on the cruise, and at the last minute wasn't able to, but sent some kits for prizes and things like that. So we decided to raffle off that quilt and give them the proceeds toward helping these ladies in Honduras. So that was very fun. And by the way, just a little side note, because it's an encouraging one. Courtney, who's the sister who was going to come along on the boat, sent me another quilt top this week, a small one that I'm going to quilt one of these days, and a sweet little letter. And basically what happened is one of their makers, they call them, one of these women they support, needed one or several, I don't remember for sure, needed $395 for some classroom student enrollments for their kids. And, you know, our quilt raffled off for $410, and that's what I sent Courtney. So it was just the perfect fit. So that was very sweet. Okay, more questions? Mr. Producer's busy hunting for pictures. He's not even looking for questions anymore. There's he and I on opening night. We had an opening reception. He was singing with the band, all the things. You guys have gotten a really quick snapshot of the cruise just like that. Lauren, why are you not using your rail magnets? Actually, I was, Lauren. I just did an advance on the quilt, and I'm going to be done quilting for this evening. So before I start quilting again, I will put them back on because it is important to stabilize that front edge for sure. Gloria, I quilted a quilt of valor recently with your wavy design, and you would have thought that I was on a ship as the waves got away from me, LOL. You know what? Those waves are pretty forgiving, though. So I hope you were happy with the result. I bet you that that veteran was very appreciative of the quilt. That's it for questions. All right, you guys. So remember, February 28th is going to be a piecing session working on a scrappy quilt. I doubt that we'll actually get to sewing. It's more going to be talking about thread and themes and plan and giving you the pattern and all those things. So watch my newsletter for exact details of the time on that and if anything changes in the plans, because sometimes it does. So I hope that you'll join me for that, and we're going to make a little sew-along out of it. So bring your scraps, bring your fun, and we'll dig through them that evening together and talk about it. So again, this has been Live and Unscripted. I'm Susan Smith. We've been working on a client quilt, quilting a free motion edge-to-edge design. Like and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of unedited, unprettified quilting. That's just the real thing. I just invite you into my studio with me. So it's been great to spend this evening, or whatever time of day it is for you, with you. Until next time, happy quilting, and we'll chat again soon.